Jayda InStitches show, and welcome to August! It's time for the 8th square in our 2022 Totally Tunisian calendar blanket. And this is the fun part of the year where we get to take all of the basic Tunisian stitches that we've learned in the first half of the year and start combining them into more interesting textured patterns in the latter half of the year. This month we are going to learn the Tunisian ribbed stitch. Now for those of you who are knitters, this is the exact same concept. You know that in knitting, you can get a ribbed stitch pattern by knit 1, purl 1, or knit 2, purl 2, or the reverse. It's exactly the same thing when it comes to Tunisian crochet. We're going to go Tunisian purl stitch, Tunisian knit stitch, two of them actually, purl, purl, knit, knit, and that is going to give us this beautiful textured ribbing. I kept wanting to call this the sweater stitch while I was crocheting, because to me it looks like the beginning of a really nice sweater. Now this ribbed stitch has quite a bit of give to it, more than some of the other Tunisian patterns we've learned so far, but not maybe as much give as, say, a knitting ribbed stitch or even other crochet ribbed stitches. But it's gorgeous, it does have give, and I found it to be easier and faster than working the honeycomb stitch. And I'd love to know down below how many of you have a similar experience. So let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table and we will stitch up the Tunisian ribbed stitch square together. In order to make our ribbed stitch square, I'm going to be using the same yarn I've been using all along. That's a size 4 medium weight acrylic. You want around 90 yards for the main color of your square and another 10 yards for your border. I'm using coral and sage. I want a pair of scissors, a yarn needle. I'm using a 5.5mm Tunisian hook, also known as an I or a 9, and I like to switch to a regular hook in order to do the border, and that is the same size, a 5.5mm or an I or a 9. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. Please visit our shop and purchase a pattern. It helps support our show, and we'll put a link to our shop in the description box down below. As usual, I highly recommend making a quick sampler of the stitch pattern before you launch into the entire square. This particular ribbed stitch pattern is based on 2 purl and 2 knit stitches, so you require a foundation chain that is any multiple of 4 plus an extra 2 stitches. I worked this sampler over a foundation chain of 10, so that's 8, the multiple of 4 plus an extra 2 stitches, because the first stitch and the last stitch are going to be Tunisian simple stitches mostly by default, but I'll explain that once we get further on into the tutorial. This sampler is 10 chains by 10 rows in height, and that gives me a really good idea of what this ribbed stitch looks like. Like the rest of the squares in this series, we are going to begin with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 38. In this case, 38 is 36, the multiple of 4, plus 2 extra stitches for either end of the square, because the first and last stitch of each row by default is a Tunisian simple stitch. But I don't want to jump ahead too far. Just crochet 38 foundation chains to start. Once you have 38 chains, row 1 is going to be a typical foundation row of Tunisian crochet. We're just going to pick up a loop in each of those foundation chains, starting in the second one, because the first loop that's left on your hook accounts for that first chain that falls away from your hook. So you want to pick up a loop for each chain. At the end of this forward pass, you'll have 38 loops on your hook. At the end of your first forward pass, you'll have something that looks like this. Unswirl it, count them up, you should have 38 loops on your hook. And the reverse pass is the standard reverse pass. We yarn over and pull back through the first loop only, and then yarn over and pull back through 2. Yarn over, pull back through 2. Yarn over, pull back through 2. All the way back, you'll be left with 1 loop on your hook. After your reverse pass, you'll be left with 1 loop on your hook. Every row hereafter is the same. It will alternate between 2 Tunisian purl stitches and 2 Tunisian knit stitches. So purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, so on and so on right across, and every row is the same. So you'll always be purling into a purl stitch and knitting into a knit stitch. And of course I'm talking Tunisian crochet, not knitting. This first loop on the hook is already using that first loop here, so every row begins in the second vertical bar. And remember, the purl stitch, we bring our yarn forward, then we insert our hook into the front vertical bar, grab our working yarn. It's going to cross over top of the bar we placed on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over, carefully pick up a loop. I find it helps to hold down that little crossed bit of yarn there and pick up a loop on our hook that way. So we'll see that again. We're doing 2 purl stitches in a row, bring yarn forward, insert hook in next vertical bar. Your working yarn crosses over the bar, you yarn over your hook. I like to keep my thumb on that crossed yarn and I pull up a loop in my, or I should say on my hook. So that's 2 forward pass Tunisian purl stitches created. Now we switch for the next 2 stitches to the Tunisian knit stitch. The Tunisian knit stitch is much easier by comparison. You are placing your hook in between the vertical bars. So there's the front vertical bar and then there's the back vertical bar, or if you pull your work apart you can sort of see that little space that runs right through the middle. I'll even show you over here. There's the front bar, there's the back bar. It looks a bit like a horseshoe. You are placing your hook right between those 2 bars all the way through the fabric. I find if I just aim for that front vertical bar and then push my hook through the fabric, I've gone between the 2 vertical bars, and that's pretty easy to keep in mind. Then you yarn over and pick up a loop. We do 2 Tunisian knit stitches in a row, so hook right through the fabric between the 2 vertical bars and pick up a loop. And that is the pattern all the way across. Purl, purl, knit, knit. To purl, we bring our yarn forward, forward, keep it out of the way. We want to insert our hook through the next vertical bar, yarn crosses, yarn over, pick up a loop, bring yarn forward, hook goes through the bar, yarn over, pick up a loop. So there's our 2 purl stitches. Yarn stays at the back for the knit stitch. You just aim for that front vertical bar and slap your hook right through it. Punch it right through the fabric. Nice and quick. I like the knit stitch. And you can tell you've done the knit stitch properly because it's pulling up what looks like an actual knit stitch on the front of your fabric. So you see that little horseshoe now loops around the loop. And you'll always know if you've done that right just by seeing that loop all the way around the bar or the loop that's sitting on your hook. So front stitch is a Tunisian simple stitch, so you ignore that when you count. 1 it does count as a loop on your hook, but it's not a knit or a purl, it's a simple. It starts with purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit. We're back to purl, so we bring our yarn forward. You might find it helpful to work on a flat surface as you work this first row and maybe all the successive rows of the pattern. I find it helps to work on my knee, and for those of you, who did the Tunisian purl stitch square with me, I did have Mr. InStitches sort of show a little insert of me working with it on my lap, because I do find that a lot easier than working in the air like I am doing here. There we go. Bring it forward again. There we go. That's my 2 purl stitches. I can see the little bumps sitting just underneath my hook. Yarn stays at the back for the knit stitch. Aim at the front vertical bar, go right through the fabric, pick up a loop, and again, aim at the vertical bar, go right through the fabric, and pick up a loop. And if I'm uncertain, I just take a quick look to make sure that that horseshoe loops all the way around the loop sitting on my hook. It will take a little bit of getting used to. The toughest part of this pattern is probably just remembering that you've done 2 of a particular stitch before you have to switch back to the other one. But like all the other Tunisian stitches we've done so far, it does become rote after a while. So 2 purl, 2 knit all the way across, and I'll hook up with you at the end of the row. Once you get all the way across, working purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, you'll finish purl, purl, knit, knit, and you'll have 1 vertical bar left, this guy. And we begin the row by a Tunisian simple stitch, sort of by default. So we're going to end the row with Tunisian simple stitch just to make things nice and tidy. And I'm going to work through both the edge loops, and that will create a mirror running stitch. So you can sort of see that little running stitch there. That's going to match this one running up the other side. So it begins with a simple stitch by default because that loop left on the hook always operates as a simple stitch, and we will finish the row with a simple stitch too, but everything in between is purl, purl, knit, knit. Count them up, you should still have 38 loops on your hook, and the reverse pass is a standard pass. Yarn over, pull back through the first loop only, yarn over, pull back through 2, yarn over, pull back through 2, yarn over, pull back through 2, all the way across. Back at the beginning, we're left with 1 loop on our hook that will operate as a simple stitch. You can see we've done 2 rows because there are 2 running chains running up the edge of our square. So it's always easy to count your rows by just counting the running chain running up the edge. And it'll look the same over here once we work a few more rows, but you can see that there's 1 chain, there's a second one. I find it easier to count them on this side. And let's look at that pattern, how it's shaping up so far. There are our 2 purl stitches. Here are our 2 knit stitches. So the knit stitch looks like what you would sort of think of when you see a machine knit stitch. It's sort of both loops showing on the front side of the fabric, and that purl are a couple of little bumps. So you should be able to pull it apart and see little sets of 2. They're going to tend to sort of stick to each other. You might even notice there's a little bit of a space between each pair, and that'll help you count as well. So you'll have 38 stitches. We're back to 1 loop, and now we repeat the same pattern again. You're always purling in a purl stitch, so purl, purl, and knitting in a knit stitch, knit, knit. The first loop on the hook is already in use for this vertical bar. It's a simple stitch by default. We begin with the purl stitch, so yarn to the front before you pick up a loop. I like to sometimes just pull it over the front of my hook. So yarn to the front for a purl stitch, keep yarn to the back for the knit stitch. You just plunk your hook right through the fabric to pick up a loop. Aim for that vertical bar and just go right through the fabric. And if you're unsure, you'll see, especially now in the second row, that knit stitch forming as you pick it up on the loop that's on your hook. So purl, purl, knit, knit. Back to purl, bring yarn to the front, pick up a loop, yarn to the front, pick up a loop. That's the 2 purls, and then yarn at the back, knit, knit. Purl, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl, knit, knit, all the way across, and I'll hook up with you once more at the end just to show you that simple stitch once again. My work, at least at the beginning, does tend to bunch up on me and twist around the hook, so whenever I get to the end of the row, on the forward pass, I always like to stop, back up, and count. And you can see that naturally those little sets of 2, 2 purl, 2 knit, 2 purl, 2 knit, automatically separate themselves. I find it makes it a lot easier to count. You end with 2 purl, 2 knit, and then that last stitch, we want to make a Tunisian simple stitch. So we're going to just insert our hook right through both the loops at the end and pick up a loop, and that will create that little running stitch up the side of our square. Standard reverse pass, yarn over, pull back through 1 loop only, yarn over, pull back through 2. Oops, let me get a good grip on my hook here. Yarn over, pull back through 2, yarn over, pull back through 2. And if you're wondering, I like to kind of keep the fabric bunched up in front of my hand so I can grip the actual hook. Now, I'm a knife grip, not a pencil grip, so that works for me. And I do find that as I'm crocheting along with the Tunisian pattern, I do have to regularly change where and how I'm gripping the hook. So if you find you have to do that too, I would consider that perfectly normal. Because you are putting on loops and then taking them off. So every so often you're changing just how much fabric is in between you and your hook. So some parts of Tunisian crochet move faster than others. For example, I find the reverse pass tends to move a lot quicker. Yarn over, pull back through 2, all the way back. Meanwhile, back at the beginning, we're back to 1 loop on our hook, and now you can really see that pattern forming. You've got your purl stitches, which create little bumps, and your knit stitches, which looks like actual knitting. Those loops are being pulled up in a column almost, all the way up vertically through the square. Little bumps, column, little bumps, column, all the way across, and you're just repeating that. Don't use the first loop or vertical bar. Start everything in the second vertical bar. Purl, purl, knit, knit. Purl, purl, knit, knit. Wherever you see a purl, you purl. Wherever you see a knit, you knit. And that's all you're going to do for 32 rows in total. Now remember, we've done 3 rows of Tunisian so far. There's our foundation row and then 2 rows of the actual ribbed stitch. That's 3 rows. So you're only going to work for 32 rows in total. So put your feet up, grab a cup of tea, relax, and just practice. Purl, purl, knit, knit. Purl, purl, knit, knit. I'll see you at the end of row 32. I have now crocheted 32 rows in total, so that's 1 row of establishing pattern and then 31 rows of the actual rib stitch. And I just love this texture. I keep wanting to call it the sweater stitch because to me it looks like the start of a sweater. Anyway, at the end of 32 rows you can fasten off unless you're going to use the same color for your border, in which case you don't have to fasten off, just chain 1. But the rest of us are going to fasten off. And now I'm going to switch back to my regular crochet hook because I find it easier to just crochet the single crochet border with the regular hook. I'm going to grab our border yarn. I'm switching to green, make a slip knot, and we're going to join with a single crochet around that first vertical bar. So if you have not changed color, you chained 1, you're just going to single crochet into this vertical bar with the rest of us. There we go. Trying to keep all my little tails down so I can work over top of them. And then you're going to single crochet around each front vertical bar all the way across. And I am trying to work over top of my short tails here. There we go. So each vertical bar, whether it's from a purl stitch or a knit stitch, you'll have 38 single crochet all across the top of your last row. Just remember you're looking for the first 2 purl and the second 2 knit, and that'll help keep you on track so you don't miss any of those vertical bars. I've worked a single crochet in each front vertical bar all the way across. The last one is going to be in that front vertical bar from the last stitch, and I'm going to work a single crochet, chain 1, and a single crochet all into that same vertical bar, and that turns the corner. That becomes the first stitch down my first side, and there are 32 rows plus the foundation chain row. So we'll have 33 single crochet down this edge by the time we're finished. And it's nice and easy. You're just going to work a single crochet in each one of those vertical bars at the edge of each row all the way down. So nice and easy to see. I've worked a single crochet into the front vertical bar of each of those edge stitches all the way down. Oh, looks so neat and tidy. Here I am at the bottom. That is the first foundation chain I created. So we're going to single crochet into that and turn the corner. So we're going to chain 1 and single crochet into the same first foundation chain. Then we're going to single crochet in each foundation chain all the way across. So you'll have 38 stitches across the bottom of your square. I'm working over that other little short tail. I've worked a single crochet in every single foundation chain all the way across to the end. There's number 38. I'm going to chain 1 and single crochet into the same foundation chain to turn the corner. This single crochet becomes the first stitch running up my second side, and including this one, which is in the foundation chain row, plus these other 32, I will have 33 single crochet worked into each of the front vertical bars. So I always find this first one, it's a little tight. There we go. So a single crochet into each vertical bar running up the second side of our square. And number 33 will be in the same place that we joined our yarn up at the top. Back up at the top, number 33 is in the same front vertical bar that we joined our yarn in, or that the first single crochet of the border row was worked into. Chain 1 to turn the last corner and join with a slip stitch to the top of that first single crochet. That is the border. You can fasten off. Take a moment to weave that tail in, and if you didn't work over your tails like I do, then you can take a moment to weave all of them in. And this lovely pattern doesn't roll terribly much. I still feel it could use a little bit of a blocking. I want it to be as square as possible, and of course I'm trying to make each of my squares as close to 12 inches by 12 inches as I possibly can. But a little light blocking, and then like I say, I'm going to worry about final blocking of the entire project once the whole blanket is stitched together. But that's a nice break. It's not rolling on me as I finish it up. And I just love that texture. I loved this pattern. I found it quick, I found it easy, I love that texture, I love watching that knit stitch column just sort of grow all the way up the length of the square, and it does have a lot of give to it. But the biggest bonus of all is that it doesn't want to curl on you. I haven't even bothered to block this one yet, and I think maybe I'll just leave it. This might be the first square of the year that I don't do any extra blocking to before I assemble it into the overall blanket. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed learning the Tunisian ribbed stitch along with us this week, and we will see you soon here on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Mr. InStitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.